Hello, welcome to another Sonic Lab special. We're here with Evan from iZotope. iZotope have just released Ozone 7, which is kind of big news amongst other things. So what's new, Evan?
Absolutely. So this is the new version of Ozone. So this is Ozone 7. If I jump to start off, just to go into click to insert module, you'll see we have a bunch of new processing available here. Now we have some new modules that are exclusive to the advanced version.
Yep.
We also have a number of improvements for the standard version, including moving over the dynamic EQ into standard.
That's going to please a lot of people.
It's a great tool for either like surgical repairs or even adding coloration because it's dependent on the incoming signal. So we'll check out a few different uses for that.
I suppose I should say, really, what is Ozone 7, in case there's somebody on the planet who doesn't know what it is. I mean, Ozone is basically the de facto, mastering plugin. I mean, it's pretty much, I don't know how much percentage of the world's music gets mastered through it, but I reckon it's a lot,
But a
right?
lot of it, yes. Yeah, Ozone is, so it's our all-in-one mastering platform. It is the very, obviously not this one, but the very first version of Ozone was the first product that iZotope ever actually sold. So it's really Genesis for us.
Right.
And the idea behind it is let's put in every tool that you need to take your mix, polish it off into something that's ready to be sent out into the world.
So this is achieved by insertion of a number of modules into the processing chain.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yep. From EQ to compression, stereo imaging processing, limiting, of course, you're not clipping. So a number of different tools there.
So let's say, well, show us your best bits first. Let's see what's coming up that we should really focus on.
Sure. So really exciting for me is a lot of the new vintage processing. So we'll start off by taking a look at the new vintage tape module. Now we borrowed our director of education's tape deck. He's a mastering engineer at MWorks. His name is Jonathan Weiner. And we did a lot of studying, did all sorts of tests with it to figure out what is it that really makes it special. It's a very clean deck because we want to go for mastering. So we want to be able to add in some of that saturation, some of the phase effects of tape, but leave out things like hiss, like wow and flutter.
The half-inch glue, as they say, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm going to do is just to kind of like test it out. First of all, a huge thing in terms of mastering is actually listening back to audio at the same perceived loudness, so that way you're not tricking yourself into thinking that it sounds better.
Tricky.
So we have this little button over here, the ear button next to bypass, and this is basically going to effectively match gain overall for Ozone. So no matter if you've got limiting and EQ and everything, it's going to play back at the same perceived level. Again, so you don't trick yourself into thinking that it sounds better. So right now we're just checking out the vintage tape module. So we're going to remove the EQ for right now, which we can just hit this little X button. And down here you can shift around modules to change the processing chain.
Gotcha.
So we're just going to start with this bypass. And this is a song by an artist from Austin, Texas called Symbionic. So we'll jump in a little bit in here. So let's explore some of the settings here. So the input drive, of course, is going to drive tape harder, which is going to change the level at which saturation occurs. We have our bias here. So if you want to make things a little bit darker, a positive bias is going to do that. So if we shift this upwards, you're going to hear it's moving the point of saturation.
And that's kind of like what you would do when you're setting up the tape machine, in real life, right? Okay.
Exactly. And of course you want a very carefully calibrated machine, but this is often a tool to be able to color audio either one way or the other. And likewise, you'll notice that if we go the other way, we're putting more of an emphasis on higher
Sort
frequencies.
of like a tilt, isn't it, almost?
Yeah, so it's changing both the frequency response and the frequencies at which harmonic distortion is really starting there. So we have, over here, you can change the inch per second that you're feeding tape through, as it were, and that's also going to change the frequency at which things like the tape head bump are occurring, saturation. We have the harmonics tool. Now, automatically, it's set up to be, again, sort of like a well-cared-for machine. Right. So we're really only getting the odd-ordered harmonics that are associated with tape. Harmonics is going to bring in some even harmonics, which are
It's going to age the tape machine. Is that the...
Yes, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and it's really as well, because even harmonics to the ear are typically associated as a bit more musical, it really adds a warm fullness to it as well. So you'll notice as I crank this up, getting a little bit more energy, a little bit more.
It's got a slight smudge to it but it's very pleasing, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's adding a little bit more 3D depth to it. And if we bypass this again, you have just a little bit more energy in there.
And it's tamed some of the very, very high as well. It seems to have sort of just smoothed out that a bit. This might be hard to hear when you finally hear it via YouTube, but you can. It's a subtle but effective, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's not heavily changing the sound of your processing. It's just adding in some saturation, some more depth there. And then the two other controls we have here are going to control basically the tape head bump, so the point at which you have that kind of like low end bump there.
Right.
So at 0, it's more of a flat response, and then if we wanted to, which for this song I wouldn't, you could increase that, which is going to then, again, create a bit of a resonance in those lower frequencies. And then finally, we have high emphasis, which is really an upper shelf.
Right.
Automatically, it's set to 4.0, which is really an attempt to make it a more flat response, but we can add a little bit more air to it. We can jump back. So again, it's very subtle, but it's adding a little bit more distance to it.
Yeah.
Or if you're going for a more classic tape sound, that's going to be a little bit on the darker side by bringing it down there. So let's say that we're pretty pleased with this. I'm going to add actually a little bit of a negative bias that way. Add a little bit more to the high end here. So cool. At this point, we've gotten the particular tape coloration that we want. There's a couple of other things I'd really want to do here, though.
Right.
So why don't we take a look first at the dynamic EQ.
Okay, yeah.
So this is the dynamic EQ, which again is now in the standard version of Ozone 7. Now, the idea behind a dynamic EQ is it's sort of an EQ with the ballistics of a compressor.
Yeah.
So it's actively going to react to the incoming audio signal. So let's say that there's a particular troublesome frequency that comes in whenever that bass sound hits. We can have it kind of notch that out or just add a little bit of a dip there, but it's only going to be once it hits the point that we don't want it there.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down the Alt Option key and kind of sweep around, and that's going to allow us to sweep through the frequency spectrum to find that frequency that we are not pleased with. So let's start playback here. So I'm not really liking the boxiness that's hitting around here.
Okay.
And that's largely in the middle channel. It's largely in the center. So what we can do is put this into mid-side mode.
Right.
If we want to, we can solo the mids just to see where that is. And now we can place this right over here. And you'll see this kind of white line moving around, and that's actually a cut that's dynamically adapting to the incoming audio.
As the level of that boxiness increases, it just pulls it down, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's going to pull it down a little bit there. And that, as you can see down here, is adjusted by that threshold control. If I increase the threshold, we're going to see that it's not actually changing the sound there. So this is a very useful tool to fix kind of the most commonly confused problems with coloration, from boxiness to like aggression. Oftentimes vocals might be bringing out a little bit too much at like 3K or so.
And also people use it quite creatively in dance for sort of following the bottom end of a bass line, or bringing the kick out, or giving it more energy at certain points as well, don't they? So
absolutely, yeah. Oftentimes in those situations, you'd be using it in the inverse mode. So this way, you're basically saying, like, if we want to, again, for this track I wouldn't, but if we wanted to increase the impact of the kick, we could create a boost here. And now in inverse mode, once it hits that level, so once the kick jumps back in, we'll see that it is boosting that low end.
Yeah, it's just flipping it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, so exactly what you said. You can absolutely use it for more creative effects as well there. But it's a great tool for figuring out just really surgical solutions to a problem. Similar to how some people might use a multiband compressor, except here, we're not running it through crossovers.
I find that easier to understand, to be honest. A dynamic EQ I find easier to get my head around than a multiband compressor.
I completely agree. I'm with you on that. I myself am really not very good with multiband compressors. Whereas this it's just sort of like an EQ that's being automated.
Yeah.
So it's very transparent.
And I guess you could run this on individual channels as well. You don't have to do it on the bus or the master, did you?
Absolutely. Yeah, actually this is a very effective de-esser as well.
Oh,
if you create a dip over like 8K or so with a with a peaker proportional Q, as
can
soon
just
as
get
that, yep, exactly. As soon as that
That's
sibilance comes in, that's going to hit there. So it's a very powerful tool. And as you mentioned, it can be used in the mixing stage as well. In Ozone 7 Advanced, every single one of these modules will load in just as a plugin, so you could instantiate just the dynamic EQ.
Right, so just keep the CPU load down on an individual track, gotcha.
Exactly, exactly. So at this point, let's say, so we've got some saturation in there. We've fixed a little bit of the problem frequencies. Another new module that we're introducing is the Vintage EQ. Now this is a Pultec style EQ.
Right.
So it still has the same kind of old Pultec tricks of like boosting and cutting the same frequencies to bring a little bit of resonance there. The classic was always adding some low end to the kick.
Well, 808 kicks, 808 hi-hats basically, and those kind of crazy present vocals as well.
Absolutely, yep. Yeah, reduce some of that presence, or add some of that air to really get it in your face. And yeah, the classic kind of getting rid of mud at the same time. And you'll notice that at the top, it is actually showing us the frequency response that we're introducing with this.
Right.
And this was actually, it's amazing what complex shapes Pultec EQs introduced to it. So we wanted to actually pull that out so it's visually impactful there. So in this case, like let's say we'll set this in mid-side again, add a little bit more energy, a little bit more warmth to the mids and to the sides, add a little bit more air to the sides possibly.
That'll open up the stereo image as well, I'd imagine, so yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's see here. Let's see, maybe a little bit more 300 hertz there. Actually, a little bit more 500, even though usually that boxiness is kind of aggressive. I think in this track it actually does work. And in the sides here, we'll add in some air around maybe 16K. Tighten up a little bit.
Just heard that. I mean, again, this is going to be quite subtle when it's YouTube compressed, but you just heard it go, just open up. I mean, these are very subtle movements you're making, but you can hear it to the ear. You know, you can definitely hear it, can't you?
And it's going to, yeah, absolutely. And all of these different processes are really stacking up to overall make a much more polished version.
And while we're doing this, is it all the same time that the level matching still working? So we're still hearing, if we add stuff, it's actually not increasing the overall level. So we're still in that A-B situation, right?
So if we hit bypass right now that is playing back at the same perceived level, and now.
That's so interesting. It's like the bottom third of the track just opened up there. The bottom third of the octave. It's just, yeah, interesting.
More energy down there, and again, the high ends opened up spatially. Yeah. So at this point, like, we're pretty good with that. Our coloration's set. So typically next, well, of course, in terms of signal flow, that's entirely up to you.
Yeah.
And you'll see with some features such as the equalizer and the post equalizer, those are exactly the same module, but wanted to make sure oftentimes, like first you may want a corrective EQ, then some compression, then EQ for color. So a lot of different options in terms of that. And again, if we needed to change the order of processing,
just drag them around.
Drag those around, exactly. So at this point, we're pretty good with that. Next I want to do just a little bit of dynamic range restriction, so a little bit of compression there. So we have different options for that. One, we could use the dynamics module, and that is our multi-band dynamics, or you could set it to one band, it's entirely up to you, that we've previously had. Or we have as well our new vintage compressor. The DSP engineer behind this, Aaron, likes to describe this as a faithful recreation of a compressor that never existed. It's a colorful and much more vibey compressor, so it's really more for feel than the dynamics module, which is much more about transparency.
Yeah.
And there's 3 different modes here. So let's have a little bit of a listen to each. So pull down the threshold. So this is more of a kind of like gluey but leveling feel.
Yeah.
If we want to just go for kind of bus compression, you'll see that the gain reduction on the sharp mode is very quick. If we go over here, you can actually see what's being reduced.
Right.
And every algorithm in here is dependent on the incoming signal, so it is adapting in terms of release time, attack time, etc. And then the smooth mode is really for overall leveling. And I guess, yeah, this view here really shows, kind of gives the best image of what it's doing dynamically. And then something that has huge impact on how compressors actually react, and reasons that, FET compressors like the 1176 and all are known for not really pumping. It's more of a vibey thing instead of like kick comes in and everything else disappears.
Yeah.
Is the sidechain filter that's innate in those designs. And so up here we can increase the high end if we want to, have it attack sibilants and things a little bit more, hi-hats. If we wanted to go a little bit more after vocals, like something like the LA2A would, we have a mid-peaking shelf here, and then likewise a high pass, which we can either remove down to 40 hertz or go up here. And of course, this is the actual detection filter, so that's what it's listening to.
Gotcha.
So maybe ease up on the ratio a little bit here. Reduce at least a little bit here. Attack. So we'll take another pass here.
Adding the extra smack, isn't it, to the kicker?
Adding smack to the kick, overall leveling, so it's adding a little bit more body. And again, bypassed everything.
Sounds much more polished, much more mastered, shall we
Much more
say.
mastered, yeah. Crazy how that works, yeah. So that is the new vintage compressor module. So at this point, I'm pretty pleased with how this sounds. Now, typically, and ultimately, a lot of things that people go for in mastering is loudness.
Yeah.
That is the state of the industry currently. Although, absolutely, with things like YouTube normalizing to around, I think, negative 13 LUFS, I've latest heard, there is sort of a movement against that,
The
which
move
is
to
cool.
pull it back a little bit.
Yeah, which I'm a fan of.
Well, also, presumably it makes the codecs work better as well if they're not being absolutely slammed to the maximum.
Absolutely, yeah. That's actually something we'll check out here in a few minutes, is the Codec preview, which is actually going to encode this as an MP3 or AAC so you can listen back to it. And that's one of the things you'll notice is if the ceiling on your maximizer is too high, like at 0 dB or something, you will instantly clip like all over the place after that encoding. So yeah, just giving a little bit more headspace is really good there. But so in terms of limiting, we have two options now. We have the vintage limiter, which is a brand new model, and this is included in both the standard and advanced version.
Okay.
And this is really a variable mu kind of design. So inspired by the Fairchild 670. But again, similar to all of our other ones, it's taking inspiration from it, but we're not trying to create a one-to-one copy. We want our own kind of feel to it.
Yeah.
And this as well, similar to the vintage compressor, has 3 different modes, each with a very different feel to it. So we'll turn on True Peak and we'll just have a bit of a listen to the different versions. We'll jump to a different part of the song. So this is the tube mode, which you'll see has a very long, smooth release time.
Yeah.
We have the analog mode. A little bit faster, a bit more emphasis towards the low end, so if you want to really retain punch and kicks, the analog mode's really smooth there. And then the modern mode, which is the quickest of them, a little bit more pumpy, so you're getting a little bit more vibe in there.
Sounds a bit more like the FM kind of sound.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So can you parallel these as well, or would you have to do that within your DAW?
That would have to be done within the DAW.
Right.
And I guess that's an important thing to bring up, is right now I'm in the standalone application, but of course this can be instantiated as a plugin within your DAW, like on your master, fader, or on your buses, whatever you want there. But yes, so in terms of running parallel, some of the modules in here, such as the dynamics module, you'll see do have the kind of parallel dry wet fader here.
Right.
But as the vintage limiter is meant to be the final state to keep it from clipping, there is not one on here.
No, it would make sense, yeah, not to have that, I guess.
So that's one option. However, we have a very new, exciting algorithm here in the maximizer. And for anyone who's familiar with Ozone, the maximizer has always been something that's been very much loved because it is very transparent, it's very clean. Again, while we don't necessarily condone just make it really loud, you can, and it's still going to be clean. So IRC are different modes.
Right, okay.
IRC stands for Intelligent Release Control. So it's basically, the release time is changing in order to adapt to the incoming audio signal to like retain transients more. And typically, you can also say, as a generalization, that as they go higher, they are more transparent.
Right, but presumably more CPU intensive as well.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, more CPU intensive and higher latency too, because they are look-ahead limiters to see,
Yeah, makes
okay, well,
sense.
what's going to be best here? Yeah.
Doing a lot of work, I'd imagine, when you get up to version 4, right?
Yes, yeah, doing a fair amount of work. And this is our brand new algorithm here. So the difference here is this is building off of technology from previous IRC modes, but this is actually utilizing spectral shaping. So it is, in a sense, a multiband maximizer.
Right.
It is a frequency-specific maximizer, or limiting algorithm. So what it's going to do is it's going to attack certain frequencies that are contributing most to peak levels.
Right.
So in this track, for example, we have the kick that's really coming through hot. If we were pushing the limiter really hard, it might cause the vocal to distort some or pump. This is going to attack that and go after that kick drum to minimize that.
Oh, right, okay.
So it allows you, again, to get it very loud without distorting or pumping. So I'm going to turn, so we have, of course, the same options over here. Your character knob, which is sort of like your average release time.
Yep.
I'm going to turn on True Peak Limiting. Again, I'm gonna pretend that we're mastering this for SoundCloud right now.
Yeah.
So probably want the ceiling around -1, maybe -1.5 dB.
That's a top tip, isn't it? Because, I mean, my world, it always used to be minus 0.3, but should be coming down a bit further than that now with the codecs, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if it's going to be compressed beyond like WAV or AAC, or WAV or AIF, whatever, then yes, yeah, you do want that headroom. Otherwise, you are going to clip.
Okay.
And
Top
MP3
tip.
clipping is not. Yes, top tip right there. So we have 3 different modes here, and let's have a little listen to each. And I'm going to turn this down so that way we're not blowing anything out here. Now you'll hear the vocals
Smooth, that's
are not pumping. Yeah.
you can see that there's some very fast action going on there, on the kick pattern.
Now if we jump forward to a little bit more full area here. Modern has a really nice thick mid-range that I like. And then,
So these are different frequency analysis algorithms, presumably, and so that drives it in slightly different directions, so those different modes.
so with these modes, it's impacting 2 things really. It's one, as you said, it's going to change that spectral shaping function, and it's also going to be adapting different IRC functions as well.
Right, so there's a lot going on under the hood with that.
Yes, yeah, a whole lot going on under the hood. So, like, let's see if... Actually, we'll turn on transient emphasis as well. It's going to add a little bit more punch. So you see right now we're hitting around like -4 RMS or so. And of course, if you're going for loudness, you want to make sure to be compressing in line, etc. But with the ceiling of -1.5, we're hitting a very high level, but it's clean.
And it's still got some dynamic range as well, which is important.
Yes, yeah, very important. So let's say at this point, you know, we're pleased. We think we've got our master good. Again, I'm going to be mastering this for SoundCloud, let's say. Now, one of the new features in the advanced version is this codec preview. And what this will do is this is going to actually encode the streaming output as either AAC or MP3, so that way you can listen back to what's being done to it.
Right.
So if we hit the little play button here, like again, SoundCloud, we'll go for MP3, 128 kilobits per second. Yep, and we actually see that we just clipped in MP3, so even at -1.5 dB ceiling, there's still potential. It's amazing what codecs will do to your audio.
So you want to drop that down a little bit.
You might want to drop it down. And then, of course, there's the debate of, well, how many clips is acceptable, but...
Better to have none, right?
Yeah, best to have none. Yeah, that way you're not dealing with distortion.
So what we're listening to is the output of the MP3 now.
Yep.
Can we hear the difference?
Absolutely. So if we hit bypass here...
Wow, that's
And then-
really interesting. The AB detail is just suddenly, hello stereo. All right.
Yep, collapses immediately.
And that was
these are actually the artifacts. So this is the difference between the compressed MP3.
Is this what was there, or what the MP3 compression does to it?
It's both, really. Okay. It's both. So this is literally the difference. So what's different between the compressed version? So it's a combination sort of missing information and distortion.
It's interesting just hearing that. I mean, it sounds like that higher, it's like a lot of noise in there basically. It sounds like that's re-stereoizing it, but reducing the amount of stereo information in the codec. That sounds like what's going on there.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. A huge, because these are pretty intelligent codecs that are going after information that it's assuming we won't notice. So a lot of high end, particularly on the sides, is what gets just tossed. It's like, oh, they're not going to notice that ambient's missing. Yeah. So at this point, like let's say that we're noticing that our stereo image is really kind of ruined. A lot of stuff is going away. Two ways we could go about that. So one, if we wanted to, maybe add in a little bit of high shelf on the sides.
So then we'd throw them out a bit wider to compensate, yeah.
Exactly. Or actually sort of seemingly counterintuitively, one of the ways that you can actually more closely preserve your stereo image is using a stereo imaging tool and narrowing the high end. So if we set this up to about like 5K or so and bring the width inwards a little bit, it's going to bring some of those higher frequencies a bit more towards the center where the codec...
less will be discarded.
Exactly, yep, where it's not looking for it. And actually, if we hit solo codec artifacts, we can actually directly hear this. So you'll see as I increase this, more information is pulled in there. If I collapse it, there's slightly less information that's getting thrown out.
Right, gotcha.
So that's a way kind of around that. But yeah, so the codec preview is a great tool to be able to see, like, all right, what's actually happening to my song, at which point we can go back, make any changes that we need to, and then bring it out.
That's really handy. And we can bounce it straight out from here into the formats that we want, right?
Yep, so right from the export menu, if I jump out here, we'll see that we can export this, export all tracks. If we have multiple tracks, they'll show up as multiple tabs here.
Okay, yep.
Either as WAV or AIF, or brand new with Ozone 7 is direct to MP3 or AAC. That said, that's typically like if you're going to be sending to friends or anything like that. If you're going to be uploading to YouTube or SoundCloud, upload the uncompressed.
The raw WAVs, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that is really a look at Ozone 7 and Ozone 7 Advanced, and that's we're very excited about it. We got a bunch of new processing in there.
So announced this recently. I'm not sure when this is going out yet, but well, it was announced yesterday, and we're filming today, so we'll get it out as soon as we possibly can. What it's actually available as well. It's not just announced.
Yes, it is. It is out as of yesterday. So this is out now in the world. So pricing wise in US. So currently we do have a little bit of a sale going on.
Yep.
So you can get the standard version for $199 instead of $249, or the advanced version for $449 instead of $499. And you'll notice that that's something new as well, is the advanced version of Ozone used to be $1,000, $999, and now that's been cut in half.
Right.
So it's making this processing available to a lot wider of an audience.
Evan, thank you very much for coming down and showing us, and for giving those mastering tips as well. I've learned quite a lot today too. Okay, well that's it. Thank you very much for watching. Please do check out the iZotope. It's a demo. You get a 10-day free demo, as with most of your stuff.
Yep.
iZotope.com/Ozone would probably do it, I'd imagine, right?
That's the one. Yep.
Okay, so do check it out, and also subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got lots of great more content coming up. Thanks for watching. See you next time.